everyone, and welcome back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode.
Yeah, today we're going deep on learning English with podcasts.
Oh, cool.
We found this really interesting episode of a podcast that's actually for English learners.
Okay.
And we're going to kind of take it apart and see what makes it so effective.
I like it.
It's almost like we're reverse engineering fluency. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm really curious to see how they approach it. There are so many language learning podcasts out there.
Right.
But what makes this one stand out?
Well, that's where our expert comes in.
Yeah.
They're amazing at, dissecting these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And pulling out those hidden gems of insight.
I can't wait.
Me too. Okay, so to set the scene, the podcast we're looking at uses this clever technique of a staged dialogue
Okay.
between a boyfriend and girlfriend.
Yeah.
They're having a little relationship drama, which, let's be honest, always makes for compelling listening.
Oh, for sure. And I bet it's a great way to keep learners engaged.
Right.
Who wants to listen to dry grammar rules when you can eavesdrop on a juicy conversation?
Exactly. But there's more to it than just entertainment. By using this kind of real-life scenario,
Yeah.
the podcast exposes learners to natural language patterns, idioms,
Yeah.
and all those everyday expressions that you wouldn't necessarily find in a textbook.
It's so important. I remember when I was learning English, I struggled to understand those subtle nuances
Oh, yeah.
of everyday speech. It's like there's this whole secret language that native speakers just get.
Totally. And that's where this podcast really shines. Right from the start, the girlfriend throws out this seemingly simple phrase,
Okay.
"Can we talk?"
Ooh.
But as our expert pointed out, it's anything but simple.
Yeah, it's like a coded message. It instantly signals that a serious conversation is coming. And maybe not a pleasant one.
Right.
It's interesting to think about how those three little words carry so much weight.
It's like a verbal red flag, isn't
Yeah.
it? It makes me wonder if there are similar phrases in other languages,
Yeah.
that convey that same sense of impending doom.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm curious to know, what can we talk sounds like in, say, Japanese or Spanish.
That's a fascinating thought. Maybe we could ask our expert later.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. The podcast also delves into the difference between to love and to be in love.
Okay.
And they don't just talk about it. They actually play short audio clips to demonstrate how each phrase sounds in conversation.
I like that. That's a really clever way to highlight the difference
Right.
in how those phrases are actually used, because let's face it, the grammar explanation can only take you so far.
Absolutely. Hearing those phrases in context makes all the difference. It's like the difference between reading about how to ride a bike and actually getting on one and feeling the balance.
Yeah, and it shows how thoughtful the podcast creators are
Yeah.
in catering to their audience of English language learners. They're anticipating the specific challenges
Right.
someone learning English might face.
Yeah. Speaking of challenges, another thing this podcast does well is break down those common phrases that can trip up even advanced learners.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They have these segments called Fluency Builders, where they dissect expressions like, "You know what I mean?"
Ah, yes. That one can be tricky. It seems so simple, but it can have different meanings.
Exactly.
Depending on the context, right?
Exactly. It can be a way of seeking confirmation, softening a statement, or even checking if someone's paying attention. It's amazing how much meaning can be packed into such a simple phrase. And the podcast really breaks it down beautifully.
Yeah, I also love how they connect these phrases to real-world situations.
Yeah.
For example, they talk about the question, where's this relationship going? And how you could also use that phrase when talking about your career or even a movie.
Yes. It's like they're giving you a language toolkit that you can use in all sorts of scenarios.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing phrases. It's about understanding the underlying structure and adapting it to different contexts.
Right.
Right.
And that brings us to one of my favorite parts, the discussion on pet names.
Oh, fun.
I'm fascinated by how language is used to express affection and intimacy.
Oh, me too. The podcast give examples like honey, sweetheart, even baby.
Ah.
But they also pointed out that what might be considered sweet in one culture could come across as cheesy or even inappropriate in another.
Right.
It all comes down to that cultural context we were talking about earlier.
Right, like that clip they played where they discuss how the equivalent of honey could sound strange or off-putting to an English speaker. That really highlights the importance of cultural sensitivity in language learning.
It's a good reminder that language isn't just about words and grammar. It's about understanding the culture behind those words.
Yeah.
And that's something this podcast does exceptionally well.
Absolutely. They seamlessly weave cultural insights into the language lessons, which makes the learning process so much richer and more engaging.
So we've covered quite a bit already, but there's still so much more to explore. What are some other aspects of this podcast that stood out to you?
One thing that struck me was how the podcast manages to be like informative and entertaining.
Yeah.
It's like they cracked the code on making language learning fun.
You're so right. It's not just about drilling vocabulary and grammar rules.
Yeah.
They found a way to make it engaging, almost like you're listening to a conversation between friends.
Exactly. And I think that's key to effective learning. When you're enjoying yourself, you're more likely to like absorb the information.
Right.
And remember it later. It's like sneaking vegetables into a delicious smoothie. You get all the benefits without even realizing it.
That's a great analogy. And it makes me think about our own deep dives.
Oh, yeah.
We try to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Present information in a way that's insightful and enjoyable.
Absolutely. Because let's face it, no one wants to listen to a dry lecture.
No.
We want to be entertained, intrigued, and maybe even surprised by what we learn.
Speaking of surprises, I was really impressed by how the podcast tackled some pretty complex grammatical concepts
Oh, yeah.
without getting bogged down in like technical jargon.
Yeah, they managed to explain things in a way that was clear
Right.
and accessible, even for someone who might not have like a strong background in grammar.
They did a brilliant job of like breaking down those concepts into bite-sized pieces
Yeah.
and using real-life examples to illustrate their points. It's like they're taking you by the hand and guiding you through the intricacies of the English language.
And that's so important for building confidence.
Yeah.
Especially for language learners who might be feeling intimidated by the whole process.
It's like they're saying, hey, English isn't this scary monster.
Right.
It's actually quite logical and even fun once you understand the basic principles.
Exactly. And that's what makes this podcast such a valuable resource. It
Yeah.
demystifies the language and makes it feel achievable.
Yeah. You know, it's making me think about all the different ways we learn and process information.
Yeah.
Some people are visual learners, others prefer auditory learning, and then there are those who learn best by doing. This podcast seems to cater to all those learning styles.
That's a great point. They incorporate visual aids, audio clips,
Yeah.
and even encourage listeners to participate in activities and exercises.
It's a multi-sensory experience
Right.
that keeps you engaged and helps you absorb the material on different levels.
And let's not forget the power of storytelling.
Ooh, good one.
The staged dialogue between the boyfriend and girlfriend provides a narrative framework. It helps to contextualize the language and make it more memorable.
Absolutely. Stories are such a powerful tool for learning. They tap into our emotions, and they help us connect with the material on a deeper level. It's
Right.
like embedding the language lesson in a mini drama.
And it's not just about the main story either.
Right.
The podcast hosts themselves weave in personal anecdotes and humorous observations, which adds another layer of engagement.
I love how they break down the fourth wall
Yeah,
and share their own experiences with language learning.
right.
It makes them feel relatable and human, which further strengthens the connection with the listener.
It's like having a conversation with friends who happen to be experts in English language learning.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the heart of what makes this podcast so effective. It's the perfect blend of education and entertainment.
Yes.
They've managed to strike that delicate balance between providing valuable insights
Yeah.
and keeping things light and engaging.
It's a testament to their skill as educators and communicators.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this particular podcast, what are some key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own language learning journey?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of finding resources that resonate with you personally.
Yes. Not every learning method will work for everyone.
Yeah.
It's about experimenting
Right.
and finding what clicks for you.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to think outside the box. Language learning doesn't have to be confined to textbooks and classrooms.
Right.
Explore podcasts, watch movies, listen to music, even engage in conversations with native speakers whenever you get the chance. The more you immerse yourself in the language, the more natural it will become.
Yeah.
And remember, learning a language is a journey,
Yes.
not a destination. Embrace the process, enjoy the ride, and don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way.
Those mistakes are often the best learning opportunities.
So true. And as we've seen with this podcast, learning English can be an incredibly rewarding and enriching experience.
Absolutely. It opens up a whole new world of communication, culture, and connection. And who knows, maybe one day you'll even be hosting your own English learning podcast.
Now that would be something.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's time to. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think it's time to shift gears and bring this deep dive to a close.
Yes, but before we go, I'd love to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. We've talked a lot about the impact of cultural context on language learning, but I think there's another layer to consider.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, it's the impact of our own personal experiences and backgrounds on how we learn and interpret language. We all bring our own unique perspectives to the table,
Right.
which inevitably shapes how we understand the world, including the nuances of language.
That's such a great point. It's like we each have our own internal translator that's constantly filtering and interpreting information based on our past experiences, cultural influences, even our own personalities.
Exactly. So as you continue your language learning journey, or any learning journey for that matter, it's valuable to be mindful of those personal filters.
Yeah.
How might your background be influencing your understanding? It's a fascinating exercise in self-awareness.
It really is. And maybe it even inspires you to explore podcasts from different English-speaking cultures.
Oh, yeah.
To see how those nuances play out in different contexts. Think about the difference between British English, American English, Australian English. They all have their own quirks and idioms that reflect the culture they come from.
That's a fantastic idea. It's all about expanding our horizons and embracing the beautiful diversity of the English language.
Well said, Mary. And on that note of embracing diversity, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive for today.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of language learning podcasts. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel for more fascinating deep dives into all sorts of interesting topics.
We've got a whole library of episodes waiting for you, covering everything from science and history to pop culture and personal development.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment letting us know what resonated with you. We love hearing from our viewers.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those minds expanding.
See you in the next deep dive.